Welcome to Breaking Math, where we explore the fascinating world of mathematics, Mapmatics, and how it shapes our everyday lives. I'm your host, Autumn Finef. In this episode, we're thrilled to be joined by Dr. Paula Rowinska, a mathematics communicator with a PhD in mathematics. You may know her from her well-known TED Talk, Let's Have a Maths Party, where she brilliantly highlights how mathematics is woven into everything around us. Paulina is also the recipient of the Imperial College President's Award for Excellence in Societal Engagement, and she's also a creator of interactive content on Brilliant.org. She's the author of Mapmatics, a mathematician's guide to navigating the world, and today she's here to deep dive into the beauty of maps and math with us.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Terms and conditions apply.
O'Reilly.
You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. It's actually really nice. We're both in Massachusetts, so
Yes.
beautiful Saturday as we're sitting here and recording, so we're really lucky.
Yeah.
Now, tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to write Mapmatics.
So I have a PhD in math, and while doing the PhD, I just realized I prefer to talk about math and write about math and science rather than actually do it. So I was just like running from one conference to another, from one talk to another. My supervisor was always worried I won't finish my PhD in time because of that. But I did. So and after that, I wanted to write, but I got a bit scared of the job insecurity in writing and journalism. So I did what many math people do. I went to financial industry, which was a big mistake. I did not fit in at all. So then I started writing, and I had a full-time writing job. And on top of that, I decided to write a book, which had been my dream since I was a kid, really. So that was kind of the reason I wrote it. I wanted to write about math for people who are scared of math, because let's face it, many people had not had the best of experiences at school. And I love maps, and I was like, there must be a book about math and maps, but there wasn't. I couldn't find anything, so I wrote it. So that's the long story short. And right now I'm here at MIT doing a science writing program, so back to school after a couple of years.
Sometimes that happens. I know the feeling when you're going from one career shift to the next, and I think a lot of folks in mathematics end up in finance. in one way or another. I ended up in crypto and blockchain after.
Yeah, makes sense. That's where the jobs are, or where the money is. And, these jobs can be very exciting, but it takes the right person.
It does, absolutely. Now, how did you become interested in the intersection of mathematics and cartography?
So I've always loved geography. Like in high school, geography was my favorite subject. I did the National Geography Olympiad. I don't know if it's a thing in the US, but it was in Poland.
We have some of them, like Reader's Digest, National Vocabulary Bee. They have a geography section. I know that I had that when I was younger.
Yeah, so I basically spent my last year of high school studying geography. And then I kind of didn't do anything with it, but it always stayed with me. So, it's hard to write a book about math, and you want people to see that math is actually used somewhere, that it's actually important. And they say write about things you know and things you love, and that's a very good advice, because I spent years working on this book and I never got bored. So yeah, as I said, I just couldn't find a book about my two passions, and that's how it happened. Like, there's no bigger story behind it, really. Like, I just thought I would write something about my hobbies, and the intersection is actually big. Like, well, I wrote a whole book about it, and I could write probably a couple of other books about it because I had to cut out so many things.
Who did you write the book for? That's where I would like to know, because it's very relatable, understandable.
So I wrote this book for people who are non-scientists. Like, you don't have to be a scientist, especially not a mathematician or a cartographer, to understand it, although I still hope that some mathematicians and cartographers will pick it up. But so I assumed, like, you finished math education like high school, so you don't need to know really very much to read this book. And I wrote it for people to show them that math is interesting, and also for some people to show that maps are interesting, because having this intersection is maybe someone will pick it up because they're interested in maps and they learn something about math, and the other way around. And the book is mostly stories, so it's not a textbook. You won't pass your exam based on this book, but hopefully you'll get interested, and maybe you'll read something more if you want to know more. So yeah, it's a typical popular science book, not a textbook.
Now, when you were laying out the book, what are some common mathematical misconceptions that people have about map making? Maybe we can dive a little bit into topology and talk a little bit about curvature as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, first misconception is that people don't realize that there's any math in maps, apart from like some numbers that appear on maps. I'm not really talking about these numbers. Like, to make a map, we need some serious mathematical knowledge, or at least maybe not knowledge, but intuition, at least. So, well, I'll start from the curvature, because what happens when we make a flat map? Well, we take our globe that's three-dimensional. I mean, it's a sphere, so like it's a surface of a three-dimensional object, but it's not flat. And we need to flatten it. So what we know from Gauss already, which was centuries ago, a very eccentric mathematician, and not only mathematician, he figured out that it's actually impossible to flatten a sphere without making any, let's call them mistakes, anything that is distortions might happen. And how can you see it actually in daily life? Well, for example, if you peel an orange, you cannot really flatten the orange peel without tearing it or just distorting it in some way. Or like when recently I fell down while running and I had to put a lot of band-aids on my knee. Well,
Yep.
it's really hard to put band-aids on your knee because the knee is round, let's say, and the band-aid is flat. So there's always like these little pieces that just don't fit. So you can, and this is the same principle for maps.
Yep.
So, and it's actually, you can prove it. This is because of the curvature. They have different curvatures. And you don't really need to know what curvature really is. It's a mathematical concept, but intuitively, like the sphere is curved, the flat piece of paper is not. So because of that, something will be distorted. And it's the job of the map maker, the cartographer, to decide what will be distorted. So, for example, some maps distort the shapes. Some maps distort the relative sizes, the lengths, so the angles. And so you have to decide what's really important for you to keep. And this decision will impact how you make your map. And we have many different types of maps. We call them projections, actually. So how we project this three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional space. And that's why we have all these different maps. So it's a really important mathematical concept that really, really, I would say it's the key decision when we are making a map of a large space. If you're making a map of like a city, it won't matter much because when you look at the globe, like the city is basically flat, approximately flat. But when you make a map of the world, then you really have to take some serious decisions.
Absolutely. Now, historically, there was some competition between nations on what or who was right. So when we're delving into topology and building out these spaces for the projections of the map, tell us a little bit about the history of it.
Today we know, most people know that the Earth is almost a sphere, but it's a bit flattened at the poles, so it's kind of has this like grapefruit shape. And we knew, so there's actually a common misconception that like we thought that Earth was flat until Great Columbus came, which is not true. Like in general, we knew that the Earth was not flat since ancient times, but people assumed it was a sphere. And at some point they realized that it's actually not exactly a sphere. But then we had two nations that didn't like each other very much, which was, it was England and France. And one of the countries claimed that the Earth is flattened at the poles, so it resembles a grapefruit. And the other that is actually elongated, so it's kind of more like an egg. And they could not really agree what it is. And you would think it's like a silly argument, like why would you argue about that? But you have to bear in mind that like up to quite recently, most of the travel happened on the sea. They were going to the lands and claiming them for themselves. These were colonial times. Not a great history, but that's what it was. So understanding the shape of the Earth was really important to be better at navigating the sea and be faster and more efficient in like grabbing these new lands. And also, it's, up to today, it's like, who will get first to the moon? Who will do first this or that? Like every nation wants to be first because then they feel like more powerful. So France sent out, France and Spain, it was like, I write a bit more in the book about it, but there are whole books about just this expedition.
Yes.
Because it's just a fascinating piece of history. So they went to South America around the equator to really measure by hand the length of 1 degree of, now I'm going to get it wrong, longitude. So to kind of understand if it's longer or shorter than the one closer to the pole. And this would show what's the shape of the Earth. Now, this was supposed to be a short trip. It took decades. Because you took these scientists who were used to just like calculating stuff on with pen and paper, and they actually had to go into the mountains. There was snow, there was heat in some areas, there was there was a jungle, there was like they were just not ready for that. Meanwhile, some people like had some interesting ideas of like giving all the money to their lover of all the expedition. Like it's a crazy story. But in the end, they figured out that yes, the Earth has grapefruit shape, but it took decades.
I have to say that that's kind of funny hearing the story for behind the scenes, because, as mathematicians, you don't usually mix the theorists with the people who do the applied work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is a today thing.
Yep.
Because we are really specializing now. Like when you read about, I don't know, Gauss, he was doing everything. He was doing experiments on himself, and he was also doing theoretical mathematics. So it really changed, I would say, in the last century.
Absolutely. It's kind of just that whole shift of what are you specializing in? And some people are really good at that one particular thing, but then you don't put somebody who's how do I put it, a theoretical like chemist into the lab.
Yeah, it might not end very well. So.
Yeah. So, those things happen over time. Now, with that, if you're talking about the different types of maps, and if we're going to look into a population, what they use, I'm going through this. Hold on. So if we're looking at like the current maps and current projections, could you tell us a little bit more about the coastline paradox? Because you talked a little bit about longitude and latitude, and how does that work?
Right. So when we have our map already, and we are looking at it has some lines. It will have coasts. It will have borders, and it's one of my favorite math facts is that like lines are essentially infinite, or they can have any length we want. And how does that work? Well, it depends on the scale of the map. So how many details we put on the map. So if it's just like a world map and you see a river, it's like basically a straight line with a few little curves. So you can take a ruler, measure like one piece of it, then measure another, and you get some approximation of the length. Then if you look, let's say, a map of Europe, and you look at the same river, there will be a few more details. So you can take you can just approximate it a bit better with these additional curves and lines. Then you look at the map of, I don't know, Poland, and you look at the same river, and you'll have more details. And you can keep going, and the more details you add, the longer the line will be. This is only about lines that are, any natural lines, I would say. So if you have a straight line, it's gonna stay straight, and the length won't change much. But if you're looking at the real world lines, like coastlines, for example, the length might change a lot, especially in places like, I don't know, the coast of Norway, that they have these fjords that can go for kilometers into the land. And then really the scale of the map can change it by a factor of 10 or 100, or So be really careful when you look at any ranking of the longest borders, longest rivers, longest XYZ. Like it's really misleading because you really need to make sure they are comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So they were all measured on the same map. And I find it really interesting because we look at like, okay, well, how difficult is this to measure a line? Well, not very difficult, right? It's the 21st century. Like we can do, we can chat to our computer and but we cannot really measure a line. I mean, we can, but it's always an approximation, and it has some real world consequences. Like in some states in the US, for example, the funding for coastline protection depends partially on how long the coastline is. So if you report coastline lengths on different scales, some states will be privileged to with respect to others, and so there are all these like political and financial consequences.
Yes, and also a lot of the places in the US, the coastline is actually shrinking. And you're currently in Boston.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Terms and conditions apply. I'm sending my Aunt Tina money directly to her bank account in the Philippines with Western Union.
I-16.
She's the self-proclaimed bingo queen of Manila, and I know better to interrupt her on bingo night, even to pick up cash.
N31.
Sending money direct to her bank account is super fast, and Aunt Tina gets more time to
Bingo!
Be the bingo queen. Western Union. Send money in-store directly to their bank accounts in the Philippines. Services offered by Western Union Financial Services, Inc., NMLS number 906983, or Western Union International Services, LLC, NMLS number 906985. Licensed as money transmitters by the New York State Department of Financial Services. See terms for details.
I remember a few, even about 10 years ago, some of the harbors and marinas, the water level is almost at the top of where some of the docks are. So if you go down to like the piers in the seaport area before, that coastline was way further out a few years ago. And now it's also coming up. So we only have that approximation for where a lot of these lines are. Now, what do people use for our regular maps on day-to-day? We have it's called Mercator Map, and that's what the majority of the population uses. So how did that come about, and why do so many people know that as the standard?
Yeah, Mercator Map is one of the most famous projections, and well, it's really old.
Yes.
It was created centuries ago, and it's still popular. It's actually used, a version of it, quite a bit modified, but it's used by online mapping services, which is why we are so used to seeing it. I was taught on Mercator Map my geography at school, and many people were. And so Mercator Map keeps the angles. So you know how I said that some things have to be distorted when we project the globe, some things stay the same.
Yes.
And here the angles stay the same. So the shapes of the lands are perfectly fine. It's what you would see if you went into space and saw the Earth. Now, this was important because this map was made for navigation. And when you're navigating, then the angles are what really matters. But what this map distorts are the sizes, relative sizes. So I grew up looking at this map, and I still have in my brain that Europe is big. And in my brain, like, Europe is maybe like half the size of Africa, which is absolutely not true. Like, Africa, South America are massive. But we don't fully realize that by looking at this map, where Greenland is like the size of Africa, basically.
Yes.
So, yeah, because what this map does, it makes everything close to the poles bigger and everything close to the equator smaller. And this is really powerful, especially given that what's close to the poles usually is richer, more powerful regions, while what's around the equator are in general countries that are still climbing to get more powerful. And we like this narrative. This map really reinforces this narrative, which is not great. On the other hand, many people really hate Mercator for that, and I would argue that I'm not saying he was not racist and he like cared about people in this other, like, let's say in Africa, South America, but I also think he had good reasons to make them up the way he did. In particular, navigation. He made it for navigation. Also, he didn't know very much about anything that wasn't like Europe, North Africa, because we haven't traveled really that much around. These were the times of the discoveries. So European discoveries. And because of that, he could kind of hide his lack of knowledge, because Africa was so small, so like the lack of details wasn't that striking. Well, he could put all the places he knew on Europe. So this was quite convenient as well. But today the map is, well, quite problematic in a way. If it's the only map we see, especially as children, then we build a wrong view of the world in our heads. But I'm not advocating we don't see it, because I really think we should see it, and but with the understanding what it means and what it represents.
I think you did bring up a really good point with that, because oftentimes the way that Europe views nations versus living in America is completely different. We don't always think about the the power of how one culture influences like the rest of the world. I think that that's something that people don't usually talk about as much, especially with, the smaller countries that are on the map usually have more power in one way or the other than a lot more around the equator.
We just, I mean, I think here we are, like, we can really talk for hours about it, like how we are taught at school,
yes,
how much attention is put, at school we learned a lot about Europe, which is natural. I grew up in Europe, so this kind of makes sense, but also a lot about North America, a few Asian countries, and the rest is like, yeah, there are some countries there, which is, not the fault of the map at all. It's just the narrative we're building.
Yes.
And hopefully this is changing. I really hope it is.
So we have different sorts of maps, right, beyond the Mercator map. And some are more topological use, and others are metric maps. Can you talk about that and the difference between these maps?
Yeah, so this is mostly about, let's zoom in and let's look at like a city.
Sure.
So a much smaller area. And it's one of the most interesting bits of the book to write was about how we as individuals navigate spaces like cities or even a campus or a building, because this is really interesting how our brains work. And this also can be seen in different maps of local areas. For example, the iconic map of London Tube, so London
Yes.
Underground, is, I think anyone who has ever been in London, they will remember this map because it has many straight, colorful lines. But when you put it on the, let's say, real map of London, it doesn't make any sense. Because what this map does is it's a topological map. A topology is it's a field of mathematics that I would say studies connections, and it's not really concerned at all about the distances. And this is what this map does. So it's when you look at the map, you can see which stations are on which tube line and which order the stations are. And so you can figure out how to get from point A to point B, but you have no idea how long it's going to take. And so never ever use tube map to walk around London, or in fact any other city, I would say. Because two pairs of stations that seem to be at the same distance from each other. One can be 3-minute walk, one can be 45-minute walk. And it's happened to me when I just moved to London. I didn't even think about it. I had this tube map, and I didn't have internet on my phone yet, and I spent
Oh my.
a long time walking to a place. I got there finally, but so don't do that. Be smarter than that. But these maps are extremely useful because if you've ever seen, so some people have made a geographical map of London transportation system and in other cities as well. And it's just too much detail. It's too confusing because you just want to get on the tube and get out at some station. And you don't really care if the train is turning or not. If it's it doesn't matter because you have no impact over it. However, when you are walking around or driving around, you might want a metric map. So not a topological map, but a metric map. And the metric map is the distances are important there. And that's what you want because you want to know exactly how long it's going to take you. So these two types of maps are both super useful, but for different applications.
Wonderful. Now, when we're looking at a different application, let's go into graph theory. So say we have our whether it's an Amazon truck or you're trying to optimize some sort of transportation system. How you go into a little bit of the traveling salesman problem in the book. So tell us what that is and how that plays a part in maps.
So traveling salesman problem is, it sounds simple. So let's say you are an Amazon delivery person and you have to deliver packages to 10 places today. So you have the addresses, you can put them on the map, and you need to visit them all once to drop off the packages. But how do you design the route that's optimal? So that's the fastest. And here the fastest can mean the time or can mean the distance. This is up to you to decide. Well, it turns out it's extremely difficult to figure out because you can figure it out maybe with 10 places you still can, but if it raises to 20, 50, 100,000, there's no way, not even like the most powerful computer will be able to figure
Right.
it out. And why is that? Because there are so many possible routes between these places that you just cannot compute them all. So the problem is simple, but the solution is just impossible on practical level. So what we do instead is we create different algorithms that approximate this solution. So you will not get the best possible path you can take, but you'll get something that's just all right. So something that won't be super long, but will be short enough for you to be quite efficient. Because otherwise, these decisions have to be taken fast. So every morning, every delivery driver gets a list of places, because it's also not that the places are the same every day, right? Like one
Right.
day I order a package, another day you order the package, and they have to like go to different places. So one cannot spend ages, like it has to be fast. So that's why we have these different smart ways of figuring out. They are very different for different delivery companies, and they are really kept top secret because that's what the company's success relies upon. There are some estimates that like 1 minute when a driver is like 1 minute of lost time costs like some crazy amount of money.
Yeah.
Which I did not realize. So actually that's why you see often drivers that have like open doors. They drive with like cars with open doors because they like want to jump out and run back in, which doesn't seem safe for me, but that's a whole different story.
Yep.
So yeah, so we have I talk in the book about a few ways of approximating this solution. There are so many, there's no way I could talk about them all, but they are also so different. Like my favorite, I think, is the one that kind of takes ideas from the animal world. So you know how ants, they always find very efficiently a way to any crumbs or any food you leave around. And they always like go, they are all going in the same way. But how do they figure out the way? Actually, they're really good at it. So they first go in random directions to find food. But then whichever ant gets the food, so finds some food, they bring the food back. And then they leave pheromones. So these substances that you would need to ask a biologist what exactly they do. But in short, they change the behavior of other ants. And then the more ants come back on the same path, this pheromone track is stronger. So then the other ants figure out like, oh, let's go there because there was food. And this way they strengthen some paths and make other paths just no ants will go there. And that's what we do in this algorithm. Like obviously instead of ants, we have ants, let's say, are coded up in a program. But I really like it because it's like, oh, we think we're so smart, but ants are smarter, so we take their ideas and we implement them. So it's just one example.
Wonderful. Now, we know that optimization and scheduling isn't really a new problem. But one big problem that I noticed in here was how does math and maps tell us more about crimes and understanding crimes? I found that to be really interesting.
Yeah. So it's also one of the most interesting interviews I've done for the book. I spoke to Dr. Kim Rosmo, who's a police officer, was the first police officer in Canada, to get a PhD, as if I remember correctly.
Very interesting, actually.
Yeah, so he came up with this formula, this method of tracking down serial killers, serial criminals, so also burglars, rapists, all terrible things. So serial crimes are very different to your everyday crimes, because often the criminal, they choose their victims not based on who the victims are. They don't know them personally very often. It's just the victim is in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's how it in general works. There's a whole psychology behind it.
Yep.
So and actually finding them is, it's very hard, but there are some interesting bits we know that can help us. So what we know is actually serial killers, they like to stay in their neighborhood of their home or workplace, so they usually don't venture out really far away. However, they will not find their victims super close to their home, possibly because it might be, it will be too easy to catch them. So the probability of finding the base of the serial criminal is actually, if you kind of draw it on a map, and if you assume that where the high probability is like a high point over the map and low probability is like a low point, it looks a bit like a volcano. So in the middle you have like a big hole where it's quite unlikely to find them. Then you have very high probability, and then it kind of goes down the further away we go.
Okay.
So what now police officers can do is they look at different places where different places where the criminal has been. It can be where the crimes happened. It can be, I don't know, where some DNA traces were found, anything they can figure out. And they use these points to calculate probabilities of different points on the map. And this is usually a local map of a county, of a city, to figure out these probabilities. And thanks to that, it will not let them find the criminal, but what it will let them do is to narrow down their search area and prioritize the places with high probability, so that they just have higher chances of finding this person. And it's worked. It's worked many times. This was Kim Rosmo's. It was his PhD thesis, and actually, it was applied, and they managed to narrow down. It was a case decades ago at this point, and they found the person. Also, I wouldn't say only thanks to this method, because there was much more work going into it, but
Of course.
it really helped. So this is how math and maps intersect to really save lives, I would say.
I'm sending my brother money directly to his bank account in India because he's apparently too busy practicing his karaoke to go pick up cash. Thankfully, I can still send money his way.
Direct to my bank account.
Yes, I know I'm sending to your bank account. Western Union. Send it their way. Send money in-store directly to their bank account in India. Services offered by Western Union Financial Services, Inc., NMLS number 906983, or Western Union International Services, LLC, NMLS number 906985, licensed as money transmitters by the New York State Department of Financial Services. See terms for details.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Terms and conditions apply.
That's really, really interesting. Now, if we're looking a little bit of a topic shift here, another thing that you talk about is gerrymandering in maps.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that. I know in previous episodes we've had people talk about mathematics and democracy, but we've never really gone into just the map perspective of it.
Yeah, gerrymandering is really important right now when this episode will be out just before the
Yes.
elections. And gerrymandering is what it is drawing the maps, the electoral maps, in a way that are biased towards one party. And it happens everywhere in the world, but in the US it's a huge problem because of the voting system here. So how it works here, as most listeners will know, but I'll just remind you. So it's basically there are two parties, and in each electoral district, when people vote, there's just one winner, and this one winner. So, for example, if the electoral district is a state, each state brings one candidate, and this is kind of tricky because states have different numbers of people, so not all votes count the same. But also on a smaller level, when we draw these districts, they can be drawn in a way to kind of squeeze all supporters of one party in like just one district or a small number of districts. So they win these districts. Absolutely, they do. The problem is that they lose all the other districts. So like all their votes are kind of wasted to go into this one district. And there are many methods of doing this gerrymandering, especially these days when we have access to really detailed data. Politicians know exactly where people live, who's voting for whom. It's really complicated, and it's really hard to detect when a map was gerrymandered, because just looking at the shape won't tell us much. And so it's a big political problem. Many scientists are working on solving it, on different ways of detecting it. And it's really a collaboration between politicians, political scientists, mathematicians, sociologists, computer scientists. Like, you have to have really multidisciplinary teams. And yeah, there are many aspects of it. Like, what I found really striking is how we gerrymander indigenous communities or people of color or just minorities that are usually underrepresented, and they really need to be represented
Yes.
on different levels of the government. And it's so easy to pack them in one place and claim they're like, oh, they live there anyway, so they live there together anyway, so like, we did nothing wrong. But it's way more complicated than that. So there again, this is one of these topics. There are whole books about just gerrymandering, and I had only one chapter, but the topic is really important. And again, we have maps and math working together to either do something bad or something good,
Yes.
depending on who's using them.
Exactly. It's like you need to shift, whether it's a zone or whatever, because your population's grown too large.
Yeah.
And that can change a whole vote for a whole state.
Yeah, it absolutely can, and people are doing stuff about it. Not only scientists, but like in some states, at least the new maps are drawn by independent people, and not politicians themselves.
Yes.
It's hard to stay unbiased if you know that you are going to be one voted for or against. Like, I'm not even blaming them exactly. Like, I don't know how I would do it to be unbiased. And it, as I said, it happens all over the world, but in many countries the system is different. So it's not that you get one candidate from every electoral district, but it depends on, for example, you count votes from the whole country and you like rank the candidates.
Rank choice
So
is indeed better. It's
yeah,
mathematically proven, but
yeah. But their argument, and as a mathematician, I definitely don't have the expertise to really say what's best, what's not, because we can prove mathematically that something is better, but then there are all other aspects. For example, sometimes we gerrymander on purpose, and it's a good thing to
yes.
actually give these minorities, underrepresented minorities, a chance. And that's the good gerrymandering, I would say. So there's this is the where it's not like some people think that math, you have an equation, you solve it, and you have one answer. No, here's the human aspect, and the math can guide you.
Correct.
But you, as a human, or a lawyer or a politician, you have to decide what you do with this information. And there's usually not one single answer, and that's why I think we need to collaborate
Definitely.
between sciences.
Yes. Now, you talk a little bit about underrepresented groups and having them represented. I know that in the book you do highlight a few particular women that are less known. Can you tell us a bit about one or two of your favorite people that you talked about?
Yeah. So in the last chapter, I actually, and this was not on purpose, I wanted to write about mapping the bottom of the seafloor and the inside of the earth. And both of these types of maps were actually developed, like the big characters in developing these two were two women that I must admit I hadn't heard about them before, and they are extremely important for science. So one was Marie Tarp, who basically discovered, or was one of the people who really contributed to discovering how tectonic plates work. And this was so recent. This was, I believe, in the 50s, 60s.
Yes.
And I somehow assumed we had known it for a long time, but actually it seems that like my parents were the first generation to actually learn about it at school,
Okay.
which is pretty crazy for me. Like for me, the
Yeah.
tectonics were just like something we had known forever. And so what she did is, she was a woman, so she couldn't go for the expeditions to measure the depth of the seafloor. She had to stay on land. And the men were bringing her their results of measuring the depth, and she was supposed to analyze them and map them. And she came up with this amazing idea of mapping the depth of the ocean on like a map of the ocean itself, so we could kind of see where the different measurements were taken. And she was like, wait a second, there's something weird going on there. And that she discovered basically the Rift Valley that we know now is this huge rift going through like whole Atlantic basically. And I mean, the Rift Valley is on land, but it's just a big rift.
Yes.
And then she also talked to a colleague, and he looked at it and he was like, oh, but there's where the earthquakes happen. And now we know that earthquakes are really where the tectonic plates meet. So people were not believing them. Like, she's just a woman, so what can she know? And it really took a lot of evidence and persuading, and a lot of these beautiful maps that most of you will have seen, this National Geographic map with this depth of the ocean there.
Yep.
And that was made in collaboration with her.
Amazing.
Yeah, so she said that, like the pictures, the images are more important than words very often, because that's what's true. And I'm really surprised that she's not like a household name, like, Einstein is.
Yes.
And she should be. And another woman was Inge Lehmann, if I'm pronouncing correctly, I don't know. She lived in Denmark, and she made a huge progress in mapping the inside of the Earth, so the different layers of the Earth, which is actually really hard to map because we cannot just look at it. So we have different ways, but the majority comes from actually earthquakes that happen somewhere in the world, and we measure when the seismic waves reach the observatory, and based on that we can figure out what they went through, so we can kind of understand what's inside.
Yep.
And she did amazing work in that. On one hand, she was responsible for some of the observatories, and she really improved the quality of data coming in, which was very important. But also she looked at the models of the Earth that were created before, and she understood that there's something wrong there. And she did something that I really loved. She simplified the problem. All her colleagues, all people so far were writing all these complicated mathematical equations that they couldn't solve. And she was like, let's forget about all that. Let's make the simplest model possible and take it from there. And this was the key. The simplification really helped her understand what was going on. So obviously, since her, many people have improved the maps of the inside of the Earth with better equipment, with better computers. But she made this huge jump, and that's how we know what's underneath our feet, really.
Wonderful. Now, when you were going through all of these other stories, was there anything else that really surprised you when you were trying to pick the topics in the book?
Oh, there were so many things I've learned. Some I already mentioned, some. Yeah, for example, the talking about the brain, and there's this huge debate on whether we have metric or topological maps in our heads. So do we navigate by understanding which way to turn, and just looking at, I have to turn here and then I have to turn there, or do we navigate by kind of understanding vaguely where we are in what's the bigger picture, so which direction we should go to? And turns out we still don't know, and that was fascinating for me. I really loved learning about the whole history of the four-color theorem and its proof. So
Yes.
four-color theorem is super simple theorem that every map, political map, let's say, can be colored with just four colors in a way that no two touching countries have the same color. Super simple. You can give your kid, if you have a child around, some markers and a map, and they can play around with it. But proving it for every single map that can be ever created is not that easy, and it took centuries. And reading about the story of it and understanding the history of all these wrong proofs, what went wrong. And this was actually the first ever computer assisted proof.
Yes.
And it was very controversial. Today we are rather accepting computer assistance with mathematical proofs, but back then it was something new and really frowned upon. And again, the story was just and understanding the proof took me a while. I remember reading about it. It's not easy to understand what's going on. And actually, this was the chapter I had to rewrite so many times because my editor was like, I don't get it. And I looked at it, probably I complicated it a bit too much. So which was a good exercise also for me to understand what's actually going on. So I also learned, while writing this book, not only learned to write, but also learned the actual math.
I think I learned that originally when I was doing origami. And you can map out the sections and the folds using whether it was 3 colors or 4 colors and certain theorems, and the mechanics just fold really flat with that.
Yeah.
So same map, same application.
Yes.
Now, was there anything that you wanted the listeners to take away from this conversation today?
I would say, well, one thing is that math and maps really go together in both ways, and it's really important to understand some basics of the math to just not be fooled by maps. And we are surrounded by maps, in the news, on the internet. Like now there are unfortunately many wars going on. We are seeing all these maps. There are elections going on. We are seeing on these maps. And the map maker will show you something they want you to see. So you need to understand how they've made, not super detailed on a detailed level, it's not your job, but your job is to understand like, what projection is it? Why is it this projection? What are they trying to hide? Or what are they trying to highlight? So it's really important to get it. And another thing I would say is that, don't be scared of math because you don't need to do equations to do math. I describe in the book, like when we are looking for lost headphones, I think, like you're doing math, you just don't know you're doing math.
Exactly.
And that's something I wish we were taught at school. And whenever I mentioned what kind of book I wrote, I get this like scared looks. Oh, I'm sure it's interesting, but not for me. And I'm like, no, it is for you if you have any interest in not even learning, just reading some stories and maybe learning something as you go. So yeah, these are my takeaways, I would say. And yeah, please do read my book. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, definitely let me know. I would love to hear, your feedback as well.
So thank you very much for coming on Breaking Math.
Thank you.
For listeners, if you're interested in the book, Mapmatics is on sale in the United States as of September 15th, 2024.
Get 15% off a set of BrakeMess Select, Select Pro, or Import Direct brake pads and 2 rotors now at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Terms and conditions apply.
O'Reilly.
You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.